In the pantheon of great trilogies lies such classics as the Back to the Future trilogy, the Lord of the Rings trilogy, Star Wars the original trilogy, and last, but certainly not least, the Dark Knight trilogy. As we sit here wondering what the future holds for the DC cinematic universe, we ask the age-old question, what the f*** happened to The Dark Knight Rises? Christopher Nolan got his start making the ultra-low budget film Following, about a writer who follows people to get inspiration for his book and gets sucked into the criminal underworld. Filmed for just £3,000, the film would garner much praise in the festival circuit, which would give Nolan quite a bit of clout, which he used to get his next script, Memento, into the hands of Aaron Ryder from Newmarket Films. Showing how much faith the little studio had in the project, after Memento was rejected by all major studios, they agreed to finance and distribute it with a budget of $4.5 million, a gamble that would pay off as the movie, with the backward storytelling, garnered great word of mouth on its way to a $40 million finish. Nolan would also receive an Oscar nomination for Best Original Screenplay. It would be Oscar-winning director Steven Soderbergh who would be so impressed with Memento that he would recommend Nolan to Warner Brothers to direct their remake of the '97 Norwegian film Insomnia. The studio initially balked at this idea as they wanted a director with a little more experience under their belt, but ultimately relented because Following and Memento are two phenomenal movies. The film, starring Academy Award winners Al Pacino, Hilary Swank, and an incredible Robin Williams in his dark phase, would garner strong reviews and ultimately make $113 million against a $46 budget, putting him in the good graces of one of the biggest movie studios in the world. Soon after, Nolan would pen a screenplay for a biopic on the life of Howard Hughes, but would shelve it when Martin Scorsese directed Aviator. He would then turn down the offer to direct the Brad Pitt starring epic Troy. But one thing Nolan did want to do, one character that he felt he could take on, was a character whose last appearance on the big screen featured nipples on the suit and an actor inside of it who, quite frankly, didn't really want to be there. Nolan would approach Warner Brothers executives with a fresh take on Batman, saying that he wanted to take it back to the beginning and show this superhero in a more real-world scenario, rather than the more cartoony way he had been presented in the last two live-action outings. Not long after, Nolan would bring on writer David S. Goyer to help craft his vision for his more realistic take on the character. Filming on Batman Begins would commence in March 2004, with the film hitting theaters on June 15, 2005, where it would open with $48 million, which many saw as a decent, if not overly spectacular number. However, word of mouth was strong and Batman Begins was able to net $150 million domestic and $373 million worldwide, with critics and audiences equally impressed with the fresh, dark, realistic take on the decades-old character. But as great as that movie was, there was one scene that got audiences to cheer louder than any other in the entire movie, when Gordon hands Batman the playing card with the Joker on it. That scene was one of the best teases for a sequel ever, and beginning the next day, the internet was flooded with fans arguing over who should play the iconic villain in the now highly anticipated follow-up. While Nolan would go off and make the excellent magician film The Prestige, fans pitched who they thought would be best for the role made so famous by Cesar Romero and, of course, Jack Nicholson. One name that pretty much nobody had on their list? Heath Ledger, who at the time was best known for his Oscar-nominated performance in Brokeback Mountain, as well as a string of more independent films. If you were on the internet in August 2006, you may have seen some of the angriest comments you had ever read when it was announced that Ledger would be taking on the iconic role of this psychotic Joker, with people vowing to never see the film because Ledger was going to ruin their character. We're sure the internet's gotten a little better since then. Long story short, Ledger's performance as the Joker remains one of the greatest performances ever captured on film. And the internet is full of morons. But none of you watching this video, of course, you're all incredibly intelligent with great taste in entertainment. He would go on to win the Oscar for Best Supporting Actor, and would have many people saying, "Who's Nicholson?" Sadly, Ledger was never able to enjoy the vast success of his performance. On January 22, 2008, Ledger was pronounced dead in his Manhattan apartment from what was later determined to be an accidental overdose of several prescription medicines. The news sent shockwaves through the Hollywood community, as not only was Ledger a respected performer, but the limited footage released for The Dark Knight looked like it was something special. And as we all know now, his performance was special, reinventing what it meant to be a comic book villain and becoming only the second person to win a posthumous Academy Award for acting. As for the film, it would become one of the biggest comic book films ever released, opening to $160 million on its way to over $1 billion worldwide, and would have ramifications on the Academy Awards that are still felt today, as when it failed to be one of the final 5 nominated for Best Picture that year, the backlash was so fervent that the following year, the Academy announced they were expanding the category to allow up to 10 nominees as a way to help get more popular films such as The Dark Knight nominated. The Dark Knight kept things open-ended with the Joker character. At the end of the film, he was still alive, and the plan, as mapped out in David S. Goyer's original 3-film treatment, was to see the third film follow the Joker's trial. Of course, Goyer's original treatment wouldn't have seen Harvey Dent turn into Two-Face until the third film, when the Joker douses Dent with acid during the trial, something that Nolan decided to rework and move up to the second film. But the plan was to bring back Ledger's Joker for the second sequel, which Ledger's sister confirmed after his death, saying that Ledger was fully committed to return to the role because he loved making the film. So with the original concept having to be tossed out due to tragic circumstances, Nolan wasn't even sure he wanted to go back to Gotham City. He said he could only see making a third film if he felt emotionally invested, that he didn't want to start on a third film only to feel it was unnecessary. He even questioned how many good third movies in a franchise could people name. He would go off and make a little movie called Inception, which would be nominated for Best Picture, as well as a score of others, including a screenplay nomination for Nolan. It too was a massive financial hit for Nolan and the studio, as it came close to hitting $1 billion worldwide. Quite a feat for an original story without any superheroes. The studio really wanted to make a sequel to The Dark Knight, and they even pitched Nolan on making the main villain for the third film the Riddler, and bringing in Inception star DiCaprio to play him. But Nolan wasn't interested in that, saying that the Riddler was too similar to the Joker. If he was going to return for a third film, he wanted an antagonist who was the exact opposite of Joker, someone physically imposing. He decided that Bane, the underutilized villain whose only previous big screen exposure was a small role in Batman and Robin, would be the perfect adversary for Batman. Nolan would draw inspiration from 3 Batman comic book stories: The Dark Knight Returns, which follows Batman as he returns after a 10-year absence, No Man's Land, which sees Gotham City cut off from the rest of the world, and Nightfall, which is hailed as the quintessential Bane story arc in the comics. He would combine those stories with a bit of an unlikely source: Charles Dickens' A Tale of Two Cities, which is a famous story that follows the reign of terror that occurred after the French Revolution. Nolan saw comparisons of his Gotham City with that of the social unrest and violence present in the timeless classic, and would even give homage to the book in the scene where Bane is seen knitting in the back of the makeshift courtroom run by Cillian Murphy's Scarecrow, as that is a direct reference to Tale of Two Cities' Madame Defarge, who liked to knit as she watched executions. Nolan would also give homage in the ending when Commissioner Gordon directly quotes from the novel in his eulogy for Bruce Wayne. So with Nolan officially coming back for a third and final outing, he and his brother Jonathan went off to write the script, with their first draft clocking in at over 400 pages. Eventually, they were able to whittle it down to a filmable length, and it was time to cast. And as most of us know, Nolan likes to cast familiar faces. He speaks to how much people love working with the director as they keep coming back time and time again. Nolan had only one choice for Bane, his Inception star Tom Hardy, who accepted the role without even reading the script. He would get to work quick, putting on 30 pounds of muscle to play the intimidating role of the man who famously broke Batman's back. Of course, at 5 foot 9 inches tall, Hardy was a bit shorter than his co-star Christian Bale, so they added lifts to his shoes to make him appear more imposing to the 6 foot tall Bale. Hardy would base his voice on famed Irish bare-knuckle boxer Bartley Gorman, which must have worked as his Bane voice is one of the most imitated in movie history. Next up was the role of Selina Kyle, who, contrary to popular belief, is never actually called Catwoman in the film, only being referenced as the Cat in a newspaper headline. Nolan would consider such names as Natalie Portman, Keira Knightley, and Lady Gaga for the role, with the final 3 reportedly being narrowed down to Jessica Biel, Kate Mara, and Anne Hathaway. Hathaway said this was the one role she desperately wanted. She had actually been cast as Black Cat in Sam Raimi's unmade Spider-Man 4 before the project was scrapped. She says that she went into her audition thinking it was for the role of Harley Quinn, and had been prepping for that, even dressing in a certain way. But in the middle of the meeting with Nolan, he told her it was for Catwoman, which made her convinced she wasn't getting the job, even though playing Catwoman had been a dream. She says that after the audition, she was a nervous wreck, waiting to hear from her agent if she had gotten the role. And one day, the phone rang and her agent asked if she was sitting down. Hathaway says she screamed, "I'm Catwoman!" Hathaway recalls that after her excitement subsided, her agent said that it wasn't the Catwoman call, but rather the Academy had asked her to host that year's Oscars. something we're sure in hindsight she wishes she turned down. Of course, a few weeks later the call did come, and Hathaway was officially cast as Selina Kyle, aka Catwoman. For two other coveted roles, Nolan again turned to his Inception cast, with Joseph Gordon-Levitt cast as beat cop John Blake, aka Robin John Blake, after passing on such names as Ryan Gosling and Mark Ruffalo, while the role of Miranda Tate was always meant for Marion Cottilard. At the time, Cotillard was pregnant and other names were considered, including Kate Winslet and Rachel Weisz, but Nolan saw no one but Cotillard in the role of Talia al Ghul, and even reworked the film's schedule so that she could give birth and have some time before coming back to film her scenes. While the role of Jen, Selina Kyle's partner in crime, would go to the always great Ted Lasso star Juno Temple, and you may even recognize a subtle Memento nod, as the great Thomas Lennon plays yet another doctor in this film. Or is he the same doctor? For his part, Christian Bale would prove his dedication to the role yet again. When he was cast in Batman Begins, he had recently come off filming The Machinist, where he weighed an unhealthy 120 pounds, and would have to bulk up to around 200 to convincingly play the role. For The Dark Knight, Bale had just come off working on his Oscar-winning role in The Fighter, where he dropped down to 145 pounds and had to bulk back up to the 200 mark again for The Dark Knight Rises. Bale has said those body transformations have taken their toll on him, and he has decided to quit going to extremes for such roles. The Dark Knight Rises would begin production on May 6, 2011 in India, and would go on until November 14th under the fake title Magnus Rex. Despite rumors, Nolan says he never considered using old footage of Heath Ledger as the Joker in this film, as he felt that would be a great disservice to his memory. The globe-trotting production would go from India to Wales to Glasgow to London to Pittsburgh and even New Jersey. Pittsburgh would serve as the main city used for Gotham after a producer noted that over the past two movies, they filmed in every inch of Chicago. Luckily, one of the film's producers had strong ties to the city. Thomas Tull just so happened to be part owner of the Pittsburgh Steelers, and would allow the production to shoot one of its most memorable scenes at the stadium. That scene was meant to take place in the dead of winter, but as with any Christmas movie you've ever seen, it was filmed mainly in the summer. At the time, Pittsburgh was experiencing one of the worst heat waves it had ever seen, so next time you watch the film and see all those background performers in the stands, in heavy coats and scarves, just remember it was around 100 degrees Fahrenheit that day. As meticulous as we all think Christopher Nolan is, he still allows his actors freedom within the scene. Hardy's scene at the football stadium where he says, "That's a lovely, lovely voice," was an improv by Hardy, as was the part where Bane rests his hand on Daggett's shoulder right before he kills him. We often think of improv in the service of comedy films, but here we can see that perfectly shaped improv in any film can truly enhance the performances, comedic or villainous. This would help Hardy in the fight scenes as well, as he said they were tough to shoot, not physically, but because it felt as though he was beating up his childhood hero. Yet when Nolan called action, he would just swing away. The one thing Nolan was very aware of during filming was spoilers. On Batman Begins, he had the freedom to shoot where he wanted and not worry about leaks because there was no expectation. But when Rises was in production, he knew that every paparazzi in the world would try to sneak shots to release to the public. The biggest spoiler would have been the fact that Batman, aka Bruce Wayne, actually dies in the end. Or does he? We'll get to that in a moment. On the day of shooting the funeral scene, the gravestone that was used didn't say Bruce Wayne on it. It said Miranda Tate, with Bruce Wayne being added to the stone in post-production. Even more, Christian Bale was on set that day in full black suit and tie and was featured first on the day's call sheet. This was done so that if any pictures leaked, Bale would clearly be in the shot, and if by any chance the production call sheet got out, Bale's name would be front and center, throwing off anyone to the tragic truth of the scene. But of course we all know, in that final montage of the film, we see Bruce alive and well, sitting across from his new beau Selina Kyle as she wears his mother's pearls at a cafe in Florence as Bruce looks over and gives Alfred a knowing nod. And yes, Bruce Wayne is alive and well in that final scene. In several interviews after the film's release, Bale and Michael Caine have said that Bruce was 100% in the cafe, having finally freed himself of the privilege and burden of being Batman. Also, the shooting script for the film even says they're alive. So that's that. Bruce Wayne survived The Dark Knight Rises. One weird cut in the movie is the death of Matthew Modine's police officer character, Peter Foley, and there's a very specific reason for that. His death scene was actually filmed, yet when Nolan saw the movie, his death was so shocking and intense that he feared if he kept it in the film, it would garner an NC-17, so he decided to cut it. We're of a different mindset though. Let the MPAA give you the NC-17 before you cut it. The teaser trailer would premiere in front of screenings of Harry Potter and the Deathly Hallows Part 2, and the full theatrical trailer would premiere before Prince of Sherlock Holmes: A Game of Shadows, while the film's prologue would be released in front of the IMAX exclusive screenings of Mission Impossible: Ghost Protocol, which would feature the entire opening of the film on the airplane, an airplane that Nolan actually crashed instead of using CGI effects. As a matter of fact, this film would only feature 500 visual effects shots, as opposed to a film like Avengers Endgame that featured over 2,700. But one unanticipated side effect of this prologue release was the fact that audiences around the world simply didn't understand it. The consensus among all moviegoers was, "What the hell is Bane saying?" which resulted in the audio team going back and actually re-recording some of the dialogue, while cleaning up the rest of the film before its eventual release. A Christopher Nolan film with sound issues? Who would have thunk it? Now it came time to score the film, and Nolan invited James Newton back to collaborate with Hans Zimmer as they had on the previous two films. However, James Newton Howard decided to pass on the opportunity, saying that Zimmer and Nolan had built up such a great chemistry that he would feel like a third wheel coming back on for Rises. Tickets for the film's IMAX screenings in New York, San Francisco, and Los Angeles would go on sale in January 2012. A full 6 months before the film's release, and would sell out within minutes, with scalpers charging upwards of $100. Anticipation for the concluding chapter of Christopher Nolan's epic trilogy was at a fever pitch. The Dark Knight Rises would be released on July 20th, 2012. Sadly, the release was forever marred when a cowardly person entered a midnight screening of the film in Aurora, Colorado, and opened fire on the nearly sold-out audience, killing 12 innocent people and wounding 70 others. Out of respect for the victims of this terrible tragedy, a massive media blitz by the film stars was canceled. Bale would use the time to go to Aurora and visit some of the victims of the hospital. He has since said that he never actually sat down to watch the film because it's too hard for him knowing what happened. Although the film was budgeted as high as $300 million with tax credits, the actual spend on the film was around $230, and with that type of money in play, they would need to reach at least $600 million to even begin to be considered profitable. Luckily, the fans showed up, and the film ultimately topped out the worldwide box office with just under $1.1 billion. Despite many unfavorable comparisons to its predecessor, it was still a critical darling, with critics saying it finished Nolan's trilogy in spectacular fashion. Audiences would agree, giving it an A cinema score, and it would go on to be nominated for a plethora of awards, including a Grammy for Best Score. What's more, in the years since its release, The Dark Knight Rises has been featured on numerous best of lists, including Empire Magazine's 301 Greatest Movies of All Time, Total Film Magazine's Best Movie of the 2010s, and even number 7 on Rolling Stone's 15 Greatest Superhero Movies Readers Poll. AFI would even name it to their top 10 films of the year for 2012. Christian Bale did say that Warner Brothers approached him about doing a 4th film in the series, but he politely turned them down, saying he would only return if Christopher Nolan was at the helm, and that seems quite unlikely. Although Nolan himself has said he would be open to coming back to the world if a story ever came to him that he felt was truly worth telling. So even though the doors seemed shut on a 4th film, someone did crack a window. And lest we forget the true legacy of The Dark Knight Rises, the time Donald Trump quoted Bane verbatim in his inauguration speech.
And giving it back to you, the people.
The people.
And that is what the fuck happened to The Dark Knight Rises.